I do not know how much time I was sitting in the closet, clinging into a lump like an animal which was driven into a corner. The silence in the house was sticky and deaf, but not the one that gives rise to peace. Rather, it breathed something underground, as if an invisible river of fear flowed across the floor, and every rustle, every click of the floor under the weight of an invisible presence made her heart frantically beat in his chest. I do not remember how I clogged there. Everything happened as in the fog, the voice of his father, heavy and even, like a stone thrown into the water. He rang in his ears even after he fell silent. He said that God sees me, that my thoughts are not my thoughts, that I opened the doors to the enemy, that he will pray until it pulls out of me what has been instilled. I breathed through my mouth. The closet was stuffy. It smelled of naphthalene and old woolen coats. I squeezed my notebook in my palm, the one where I hid secret lines written under the blanket while everyone was sleeping. There were poems about summer, about the sky, about a kiss that has never been. There was everything that I had no right to feel. Outside, the floor creak was heard. I froze. Someone entered the room, probably father, or someone from the older brothers, as they called themselves. The steps were heavy, cautious. I knew this rhythm. First a heel, then a toe, like on ceremonies, and then a voice. Whisper, almost affectionately, "Lord, open her eyes to her, show her the way." I barely restrained the sob. I knew that I could not cry. If he hears that I was in the closet, he would decide that I was hiding, and hiding is already recognition. They called this spirit of fear. They beat him for him. They prayed for him. They expelled him. When I was small, I believed that praying is how to speak with the sky, that God is someone who hugs you when scary. But then I realized, in their world, God did not console. He followed. Corral. I was waiting for mistakes, and if you make a mistake, darkness instills in you. So they said. And then it was necessary to cleanse himself, through the post, through confession, through punishment. I froze when I heard the chair moved away. Father sat down and fell silent. Just sat. Minutes stretched out like blood. I remembered how one of the sisters was kicked out a few weeks ago. Her name was Marina. She was accused of fornication because someone saw her smiled at the passerby. The whole society, our entire community, gathered in the prayer hall. At first, the pastor said that you need to be strictly separate from the world. Then someone began to speak languages. Then the pastor went to Marina and hit her on his cheek, silently. And then she was taken away. No one knew where. And then I stood at the end of the hall, and my knees were shaking. Now I'm in the closet, and I'm 15. I knew that if they find me with a book, with my lines, it would be worse than if they found drugs. They said that the imagination is an open door to the enemy, that art is from the devil, that even music outside the meeting is a sin. If this is not praise, then this is corruption. But I wrote. She wrote because she could not breathe otherwise. When I heard the door closed quietly, I did not immediately dare to get out. Waited. A minute, 2, 3. Then she carefully opened the wardrobe sash as if a siren could escape from him. Nobody. Dark. Only on the floor, a strip of light from a ajar door in the corridor. I slowly went out, tightly clutching the book to my chest, and went to the window. The window was old, wooden, with a castle. We could not open the windows. The father said that the foreign air carries impurity. But I have long learned how to push the spinger with a knife. I did it almost silently. The cold air of the night whipped the face. Outside the window is silence. The city was asleep. And in this silence, in this distant hum of cars, there was something real. Not sticky, not survived, not controlled. I wanted to jump. Do not die. Just escape. Get out. At least for a minute. I did not jump. I returned to the room. I locked the window. I hid the book under the board in the floor. I secretly unscrewed one of the screws. Returned to the bed. Under the blanket. I wrote again, with a trembling hand. I don't know who I am, but I know who I do not want to be. The following days merged into a monotonous ritual: prayers, obedience, proceedings. I became a shadow. I tried not to think, not to feel, but inside me something continued to fight, tiny and stubborn, something that was not killed. Sometimes it seemed to me that the time inside the community flowed back. We did not have a TV, radio, only in the kitchen, and only preaching. Newspapers were considered worldly evil, books, gates to lies. Even school textbooks carefully looked at the subject of influences, tearing off the pages with evolution, psychology, and literature, in which the words love, passion, kiss were. Once he pulled out the whole chapter from my textbook on literature, because there was an excerpt from Crime and Punishment. Darkness, he said, it is impossible for this to be in your mind. You do not need to know this. But I needed. I just didn't know why. I did not know how to explain this. I just felt hunger lives in me, and it is not in the flesh, but in truth, in the light which over the years has become weaker and weaker. I didn't know how he looked, this light, but I felt its absence, how a blind one feels the absence of the sun. Father often said that love is obedience, that the one who loves does not ask questions. He was tall, lean, with a face that never changed, even when he was angry, even when he beat. He could talk about mercy, and in the same tone to order the pastor to instruct the path of one of the younger ones. The pastor was no less terrible, with a mocking smile and the words the Nazarboc learned like bullets: "You have sinned. You caused evil. You are the bearer of the spirit of fornication." When one evening my father noticed that I was looking out the window for too long, he came up to me and put his hand on his shoulder, silently, pressing. I shuddered. He leaned toward the ear. The eyes are the gates of the soul. The enemy looks through them when you are not watching. He left a bruise on the collarbone. I then first wrote the word hate in my notebook, and then she crossed out. Because she was afraid that someone would find him. I was 8. I was on my knees in the meeting room. There was a post, the 15th day. We did not eat, just drank water and prayed. Mom whispered, "Only be patient, the Lord sees." But in her eyes there was fear, not faith. I was torn right onto the carpet. I fell. Someone came up. Brother Zakar. He did not help. He leaned over and whispered, "This is the spirit of fornication. Be patient. This is purification." Mom looked without moving. Then I did not understand why she did not fit. Why did not hug? I did not raise me from the floor. Only later I realized she was also afraid. Returning to the present, I often caught myself on the fact that my soul is a house in which there are no doors, only windows, and they are tightly stabbed. Every day I tried to do everything correctly. I wore a long skirt, lowered my eyes, was silent when the brothers came to visit us, and listened to how they say that a woman is a vessel, woman is an assistant, woman is a temptation. But there was something inside that did not give in to control. Sometimes, at night, I heard the heart beat too loudly, and it seemed to me that God hears him, as they said, that he knows that I do not believe. What am I praying to survive and not to be closer? That I do all this not out of love, but out of fear. I was afraid that he would kill me, or that through them, through his father, through the pastor, through the brothers, he will simply break me completely. Once on Sunday, I accidentally saw myself in the mirror, not as usual, in the morning, when my hair was cleaned and my face was lowered. And for real, gaze. I saw a girl like a faded photo in reflection. Long, with dark circles under the eyes, with lips from which life has long left. I looked, and scared, because I did not recognize myself. I grabbed the mirror, small pocket, which I hid in the box, and broke it. The fragments sprinkled to the floor, and one cut my hand. There was a little blood, a thin scarlet strip on white skin. And in this pain tiny, fleeting, there was something alive. As if for the first time in a long time I remembered that I was existing. I hid the fragments. Blood was erased. I put a bandage. Mom said that she cuts on the knitting needle. She nodded, without question. I stopped asking for a long time. They began to suspect when I stopped singing on prayers. My aunt, Sister Rachel, told my father that I had an extinct spirit. I was called to the small room, as we called the back of the prayer house, where they called for instructions. There were 3 men, Pastor, my father, and Zakar. The pastor spoke calmly, almost affectionately. We feel a discord in you. You closed. You do not let the Lord speak to you. Why? I was silent. I tried to keep tears, but inside everything was shaking, because I knew that if I say at least a word, the truth, they would punish me. And if I lie, I will betray myself. The pastor put my hand on my forehead. The spirit of despondency. We will drive him out. And they began to pray, loud, scream, to scream as if there really is something inside me, as if I am a vessel full of dirt. I squeezed. Zakar put his hand on my shoulder. Squeezed. Then on the neck. I don't remember how I left the room. I just remember how I was lying in the bathroom, pressing my forehead against the cold tile, and I thought, if you could dissolve, just disappear, so that no one will notice. Days and nights spread like dirty water in a rusted groove. I tried to hold on, for myself, for the thin light that still burned inside, but every word, every touch, every test seemed to tear off the layer by the layer of what I called myself. Time ceased to be a measurement. It became a torment in which it was impossible to find neither the beginning nor the end. In the evenings, when the house was already plunged into severe silence, I allowed myself one weakness. I squeezed the same notebook in my hands. There, among the lines torn from the heart, there were words that it seemed could only keep me from the abyss. If I disappear, who will remember? If I get lost, who will remember that I was once breathing? I was afraid that one day I would cease to feel even this, fear, hope, pain, that I will remain an empty shell, completely dissolved in someone else's will. On one of these evenings, when the silence was especially thick and pressing, I heard how the floor cracked in the corridor. My heart was beating more often. Adrenaline exploded inside, but I forced myself not to move. The steps approached my room, at first leisurely, as usual, and then accelerated sharply. The door swung open. Father came in. He stood like a shadow, tall, unblinking, cold. His eyes shone with inexpressible cruelty, and in this look I first saw what I had only felt: absolute contempt. You play with fire, he said in an even voice, approaching. I tried to get up, but my legs treacherously gave way, as if someone tied me with chains of fear, and I was a captive in my own body. Stop lying, he added, and steel rang in his voice. He grabbed a notebook out of my hand. Flying the pages, he read aloud, as if he had pronounced the verdict. I hate. Escape. Light that is not. His lips twisted in a brutal smile. That's what you wear in yourself. This is what you hide from us. I was silent. The words whistled in the ears. The heart was torn. 2 could no longer hide. I wanted to scream, run, cry, but nothing came out. He squeezed the notebook and threw it to the floor. These are devilish words. You are a lost soul. We will clean you. A new cleaning has begun. In front of her mother, who stood in the corner, depressed and broken, like a chain of fear itself, I was connected. In the room where the older brothers and pastors usually gathered, they subjected me to prayers, loud, frantic, screaming to expel evil. With each of their words, I was more and more pushed me with powerlessness and pain. The pastor hit me in the face. Not much, but enough for me to feel that my body does not belong to me. Let yourself go to God, he said, or you will die. At that moment, something cracked in me. It broke. There was a feeling that someone tears the soul to pieces, pulls out every spark of life. I wanted to die. I wanted this torment to end. But then I heard a whisper. Quiet, almost invisible, like the wind through the cracks. You are stronger than them. And I realized that inside me, there is still life, no matter what. The next morning, when everything was calmed down, I found that my notebook remained in the room, neatly laid on the table. Someone returned her. Who? I didn't know. But this small sign was like a glimpse of light in endless darkness. I was still a child. In the school court, among the childhood laughter and noise, I first felt the taste of freedom. We played hide and seek and I hid behind the tree, closing my eyes and imagining that I could be anyone. Then a girl appeared nearby, Lena. She was not from our community. She had bright hair, and she talked about how they liked to sing songs and dance in their house. I listened, and something warmed up in my chest, like a sunlight through a gloomy sky. At that moment, I first realized that the world could be different. But then they found me. I was kicked out of school. They were forbidden to communicate with Lena. They said that she was an enemy. And I was left alone. Returning to the present, I realized that this loneliness I have to find the forces that I have there has never been. The forces to resist not only external pressure, but also inner fear, doubts, pain. One night, when the house had long plunged into motionlessness, I lay in my room and listened to how somewhere far along the street the leaves quietly rustle. It seemed as if darkness itself whispers to me about something that was not subject to words. I lay motionless, trying to drown out everything that squeezed my chest. Fear, pain, despair. But they only multiplied, turning into a heavy load. Suddenly a thought surfaced in my head, not from this life, not from my world, like a voice that broke the wall of silence. You are not alone. It was strange. I never told anyone about my thoughts, about my secret prayers and desires. But that night, in the middle of the darkness, it seemed to me that the voice was real, not the voice of God from the sermons and prayers, but by the voice of another world, where there is hope. I turned to the window and looked at the black sky. The shadows of the clouds played on the stars, but in this darkness a weak spark suddenly greeted, like a fragment, the hopes that the light will break through. The next days became the beginning of the internal revolution. I began to secretly write down everything that I felt, my fears, doubts, pain, but also hope. I was afraid that someone would find my notes, so I hid them in a cache behind the old board in the floor of my room. The more I wrote, the clearer the thought became. I can't break me. I cannot break myself. Once, when my father went to meet with other elders, and my mother, tired and humble, fell asleep in the kitchen, I decided to open a book on the impossible. Real with printed letters and pictures, which I once secretly brought from the library outside the city. There were words that frightened, but also attracted at the same time. Freedom begins where fear ends. These lines aroused in me a feeling that I did not know for a long time, a thirst for life, real and bright. But every day the thought crushed more and more and more, that the world in which I was born and grew up will never let me go. That religion, which was supposed to be a defense, became my prison. My attempts to be became more dangerous. Father noticed changes. His views became colder. The words are sharper. One evening, when I came home later than usual, after a secret meeting with Lena, who now tried to help me understand myself and the world, my father was waiting for me at the front door. "You play with fire," he said without emotion. I could no longer hide that I dream of leaving. Go far where no one will try to break me. "Maybe this house does not need you," I said quietly. He froze. The gaze became frighteningly hard. "You are my daughter," he said finally, "and I will do everything to come back." That evening became a turning point. I realized that the struggle is not only outside, but also inside me. What fears that fathers and pastors drove into the souls of children remain there, in the depths, like poison. And to survive, you need to find the strength to break out. That night, I decided for the first time to find light in myself, even if the whole world around is immersed in darkness. Nights became mine, the only allies. When the house plunged into silence and the heavy breathing of sleep filled the rooms, I took out my notebook from the cache and wrote, without stopping, without fear, without looking back. Each word became a piece of brick from which I tried to build another reality. Reality without shackles, without screams, without prayers, turned into torture. But in the afternoon I was different. Quiet, humble, like a statue of marble, which no one would notice or disturb. I obeyed, smiled, nodded, trying to please so as not to light a new storm. But it was only a mask. Inside is a fire. One evening, when my father went to one of his meetings of faith, I heard a conversation between my mother and Aunt Rachel. I stood at the door, hiding in the shade, and listened as my mother cried quietly, "I'm afraid for her, Rachel. She scares me. She is no longer the same." Aunt Rachel answered coldly, "This is a temptation. The Spirit opposes God's plan. We must straighten her. Must straighten." I felt so bad that I fell to my knees panting heavily. The pain squeezed his chest as if someone squeezed the heart with an iron press. I wanted to scream, but my voice did not find a way out. Soon after, my father arranged an instruction for me, which became the apogee of my horror. He kicked me out of the house for the whole day, one under the pretext of cleansing the spirit. It was cold and scary to me, and for the first time I felt that fear is not just a feeling, but a living beast, that Clycast is ruthless. In this day of loneliness, I walked along the streets with my head down, trying not to meet the eyes of passers-by. I walked, not understanding where, but with every step, something inside me grew stronger, weak, fragile, but real. I thought about Lena, about the book, about the stars that saw me at night. And at some point I felt that inside me there was no longer the fear that I had been constrained before. Only the thirst for freedom remained. Returning home in the evening, I saw that my mother was crying in her room. She could not even look at me. In her eyes, powerlessness was reflected, the desire to protect me and fear of losing. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I can't help you." I hugged her tightly, for the first time in a long time feeling that we were on the same side, that she is not an enemy, but a captive of this world, like me. But the father has not changed. His gaze became even colder. The words were tougher. He threatened that if I did not change, they would expel me from the community, and then I would be left alone in this world. And then I realized, if I want to live, I need to leave. Go far. But where? Who to trust? How to find strength? That night I decided. I wrote a letter, not relatives, not to the pastor, but to someone else, to someone who does not know me, but can understand. I did not know if it would ever come, but it became for me a symbol of hope. The letter lay in my backpack, hidden among the things that I collected secretly and dropped. Each thing is a small step towards freedom, a little evidence that I am alive, that I am struggling. I knew, If they catch me with this letter, the consequences will be terrible. But the risk was the only choice. The night before the shoot it is filled with anxiety mixed with an unusual feeling of anticipation. The heart was beating not from fear, from hope. I lay on the bed and mentally returned to the moment when I first felt the taste of real life. To Lena, to books, to the stars. These memories were an anchor for me, which did not allow me to collapse completely. Suddenly, steps were heard in the corridor. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Father passed the room without noticing me. I closed my eyes, imagining myself far from here, where no one would break me, where I can breathe. At dawn, I left the house. My heart was pounding, as if I wanted to break out. With every step, I moved away from the past, from pain, from chains that constrained my soul. But in the depths I knew, the road would be long and dangerous. This is not just an escape. This is the beginning of a new life, where you will need to learn how to live again, without fears and labels. The first point was Lena's house. She met me with an open embrace, without condemnation, without fear. There, among her books and laughter, I first felt the taste of freedom. However, freedom was not so simple. Inside me, fear still lived, like a shadow that pursued my every step. Fear of being caught, fear of betrayal, fear that they will never accept me. I began to visit the support group for those who suffered from religious violence. There, for the first time, I heard stories similar to mine, stories of pain, struggle, and hopes. There I realized that not one. And this knowledge gave the strength to continue. But there was not everything simple. Some participants were afraid to speak openly. Others hid their tears behind smiles. We were all connected by invisible threads, the threads of pain and the desire to live. I opened for the first time, told my story. Each sound, every word, was like a splash from the depths of the soul. After the story, it seemed to me that I became easier, as if I had thrown away heavy armor of fear. Every morning, it has now begun with a struggle, not with an external enemy, but with himself. The light whisper of doubt and fear became louder when Ishi was left alone with thoughts. He said, "You are not worthy of freedom. You will never be able to forget. They are right. You are broken." But I learned to resist, step by step, every new day. She learned not to listen to the voice that for years restrained me in a cage. The support group was my support, but not everything was smooth there. One of the participants, a middle-aged man who seemed to have nothing to fear, once accused me of weakness. His words burned. "You just want pity. You do not understand that real faith is suffering and humility." I looked at him and understood. We are all here, victims of the same prison, but everyone is trying to survive in their own way. His words were a reflection of the internal struggle, which he had not yet been able to win. This clash has become a lesson for me. Not everyone is ready to understand. Not everyone wants to get out of the shadows. One evening, when I returned home after the meeting, a stranger suddenly appeared on the street. His eyes were heavy and wary, and his voice was muffled. "Are you Alice?" he asked. I nodded, trying not to show fear. "I heard your story. You know, there are people who can help, but you must be prepared for the fact that it will not be easy." He handed me a business card, an address and a phone. I did not know whether to trust this person, but in my soul, I felt that it could be a chance. That night, I looked at the ceiling for a long time, recalling every event of the last months. All trials, tears, fears, and that tiny spark that was still burning inside. I had to make a choice, to remain safe of the support group, but within its borders, or take a chance, go further, to the unknown, in search of real freedom. I understood. The path will be long and thorny, but another way. Morning met me with a grey light breaking through the curtains. On the table lay a business card, like a lighthouse in the sea of my doubts. I held her in my hands and thought about what help means in my world, where words and actions are often separated by abyss. I could not believe that I was really ready to take this step is to contact a stranger, to quit the last security anchor. But inside me, a voice sounded louder who said, "You deserve life without fear." I dialed the number. The voice on the other end of the line was soft, confident that a person who had long seen this and knows where this path leads. "We will help you. You are not alone," he said. On the same day, I was met in a small assistance center, which seemed to live in the shadow of a large city. There were no loud words or sermons, only people who understood the pain and strove for freedom. The first weeks were filled with hard work. Not physical, but the one that changed me from the inside. Psychologists, lawyers, volunteers, all together built a bridge between me and a new life. They taught me to look fear in my eyes, not to hide, not to run away. Every day I met with the history of others, women and men who have passed through religious violence. We told our fears, our hopes, and in these stories I reflected myself. But the more I opened, the more I felt the pressure of the past. It did not let go, like a chain, dragging all the same. One evening, sitting on a bench by the center, I first asked myself, what does freedom mean? Is it just a lack of fear? Or something more? The right to be yourself? The right to choose? The right to life? The answers did not come easily, but I understood the main thing. Freedom is a process. This is a struggle that never ends while we are alive. And at that moment I first felt something new, inner peace, which does not depend on external circumstances. But the past was not going to leave me alone. Several times I noticed that someone was following me, heard calls to the phone unanswered, received letters with threats. Fear was returning, but now he no longer owned me as before. I learned to keep him under control, learned to defend myself. There were still many tests ahead, but now I knew I am not alone. Once, when the evening was already plunging the city into twilight, I returned home after another meeting at the support center. It was quiet on the streets, only rare lanterns cut the darkness with a yellowish light. I walked quickly, almost ran, feeling how every shadow seems alive as if waiting to grab me. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared around the corner. The heart went into the heels, fear hit the body as if with a cold chain. I knew, this is not an accident. I am persecuted. I slowed down, trying to understand who it was. A middle-aged man. The clothes are untidy, the eyes are dark and indifferent. He stopped nearby, spoke in a low voice. "Alice, you think that you are gone? But the past does not let go. They will come for you." I silently looked into his eyes, trying to find at least some kind of weakness, even a hint of the opportunity to avoid this meeting. "Why are you here?" I asked in a trembling voice. He smiled without joy. "Because they need you. You have to return." These words sounded like a sentence. The return meant death, not only physical, but also spiritual. I felt how it explodes inside me again, fear, but no longer the one who fettered me for years. It was the fear of a new one, the fear of losing everything that fought for. Returning home, I closed in the room and took out a diary. She wrote for a long time, trying to comprehend what was happening. Voices from the past, threat, everything merged into one stream, which was difficult to stop. Scenes from childhood surfaced in my head when my father, inspired by his faith, considered me a traitor even before I dared to doubt. I remember how he once told me, "If you leave, then you will only take the void with you." These words stuck deep inside like a blade. Now I knew that this emptiness was not a punishment, but a challenge, the challenge that I must accept. A few days later, I decided not to hide. Instead, I went to the local church, the very one where my childhood passed, where I first felt fear. I came in quietly, the smell of incense and the candles hit from memory. There, among the usual faces, I heard voices, talking about righteousness, about sins, about repentance. I sat in the last row closed her eyes. A storm was raging inside, but I was no longer a child who was trembling under the oppression of fear. I was a woman who learned to say no. The silence was interrupted by steps. To my surprise, a woman came up to me, one of those who used to speak with me strictly and condemningly. "Alice," she said quietly, "I know that you have experienced a lot. I was also here too, and I know that repentance is not always exile. Sometimes this is the beginning." Her words became an unexpected light for me. Not everyone here did not care. Not everyone wanted to see me broken. But before taking a step towards the past, I had to finally break the chains. Accept yourself as I am. And then a real struggle began, not with external demons, but with internal. The fight against oneself was the most difficult test. Voices constantly sounded inside me. Some of them belonged to the past, part the present. Sometimes they merged into chaos which could not be controlled. Seku tried to hold on to the new one that appeared in me, for the opportunity to breathe freely, for the right to my own choice. But the old wounds did not heal, and every day seemed a battle for life. In the center of support, they gave me a task: to write a letter to your past, not for others, but for yourself. The words had to go out so that I could understand, release, and start again. I wrote for a long time. The letter was pain, fear, anger, and hope. I described everything that I survived, how my father broke me with my own hands and words, how my mother cried, but could not help, as I was afraid to look into the eyes of the world. And when the letter was ready, I burned it in the fireplace, as if letting go of the chain that binded my soul. Meanwhile, relations with the mother have become more complicated. She could not understand my decision to leave, and this gave rise to a new conflict. "You throw us," she said through tears. "You forget who we are." I answered her that I did not forget, but I have to live my life, not under fear and threats. These words wounded her, but I could no longer pretend. Soon after, the mother got seriously ill. I came to her hospital, holding my hands in my hands, which once caressed me, and now they seemed so fragile. In her eyes, I saw not condemnation, but love and regret. Love which was for a long time by fear. "Forgive me," she whispered, "that she could not protect you." I squeezed her hand, realizing that even in her weakness, there was a force that I should now carry further. The path to freedom turned out to be long and winding. Sometimes I felt that I was standing on the edge of the abyss, but every step taught me to believe in myself and the possibility of a new life. Now I knew freedom begins inside. Several months passed, and I felt that she had finally begun to breathe full breaths. The shadows of the past did not disappear completely, but stopped dictating my steps. Instead of fear, now there was a choice: to live their own life, no matter what. Freedom was not a finish line, but by the road on which I learned to be myself, weak and strong at the same time, vulnerable and bold. I returned to the support center, not as a victim, but as a person who has experienced a storm and is now ready to help others find light in the dark. The last meeting with his father remained in memory as the culmination of many years of struggle. He stood in front of me, old and broken, with bitterness in his eyes. I looked at him without fear, without hatred, with regret and understanding. "You chose your way," he said quietly, "but know that you will always be part of us." I nodded without answering. This was enough. At that moment, I realized that freedom is not a place where there is no pain.